Chapter 3. Okonkwo did not have the start in life, which many young men usually had. He did not inherit a barn from his father. There was no barn to inherit. The story was told in Mwofia of how his father, Unoka, had gone to consult the oracle of the hills and the caves to find out why he always had a miserable harvest. The oracle was called Agbala, and people came from far and near to consult it. They came when misfortune dogged their steps, or when they had a dispute with their neighbors. They came to discover what the future held for them, or to consult the spirits of their departed fathers. The way into the shrine was a round hole at the side of a hill, just a little bigger than the round opening into a hen house. Worshippers, and those who came to seek knowledge from the god, crawled on their belly through the hole, and found themselves in a dark, endless space, in the presence of Agbala. No one had ever beheld Agbala, except his priestess. But no one who had ever crawled into his awful shrine had come out without the fear of his power. His priestess stood by the sacred fire which she built in the heart of the cave, and proclaimed the will of the god. The fire did not burn with a flame. The glowing logs only served to light up vaguely the dark figure of the priestess. Sometimes, a man came to consult the spirit of his dead father or relative. It was said that when such a spirit appeared, the man saw it vaguely in the darkness, but never heard its voice. Some people even said that they had heard the spirits flying and flapping their wings against the roof of the cave. Many years ago, when Okonkwo was still a boy, his father, Unoka, had gone to consult Agbala. The priestess in those days was a woman called Chika. She was full of the power of her god, and she was greatly feared. Unoka stood before her and began his story. "Every year," he said sadly, "before I put any crop in the earth, I sacrifice a cock to Ani, the owner of all land. It is the law of our fathers. I also kill a cock at the shrine of Ifejoku, the god of yams. I clear the bush and set fire to it when it is dry. I sow the yams when the first rain has fallen, and stake them when the young tendrils appear. I weed." "Hold your peace," screamed the priestess, her voice terrible as it echoed through the dark void. "You have offended neither the gods nor your fathers, and when a man is at peace with his gods and his ancestors, his harvest will be good or bad, according to the strength of his arm. You, Unoka, are known in all the clan for the weakness of your machete and your hoe. When your neighbors go out with their axe to cut down virgin forests, you sow your yams on exhausted farms that take no labor to clear. They cross 7 rivers to make their farms. You stay at home and offer sacrifices to a reluctant soil. Go home and work like a man." Unoka was an ill-fated man. He had a bad chi, or personal god, and evil fortune followed him to the grave, or rather, to his death, for he had no grave. He died of the swelling, which was an abomination to the earth goddess. When a man was afflicted with swelling in the stomach and the limbs, he was not allowed to die in the house. He was carried to the evil forest and left there to die. There was the story of a very stubborn man who staggered back to his house and had to be carried again to the forest and tied to a tree. The sickness was an abomination to the earth, and so the victim could not be buried in her bowels. He died and rotted away above the earth, and was not given the first or the second burial. Such was Unoka's fate. When they carried him away, he took with him his flute. With a father like Unoka, Okonkwo did not have the start in life which many young men had. He neither inherited a barn nor a title, nor even a young wife. But in spite of these disadvantages, he had begun even in his father's lifetime to lay the foundations of a prosperous future. It was slow and painful, but he threw himself into it like one possessed, and indeed, he was possessed by the fear of his father's contemptible life and shameful death. There was a wealthy man in Okonkwo's village who had 3 huge barns, 9 wives, and 30 children. His name was Nwakibie, and he had taken the highest but one title which a man could take in the clan. It was for this man that Okonkwo worked to earn his first seed yams. He took a pot of palm wine and a cock to Noirquebie. 2 elderly neighbors were sent for, and Noirquebie's 2 grown-up sons were also present in his obi. He presented a kola nut and an alligator pepper, which were passed round for all to see, and then returned to him. He broke the nut, saying, "We shall all live. We pray for life, children, a good harvest, and happiness. You will have what is good for you, and I will have what is good for me. Let the kite perch, and let the eagle perch too. If one says no to the other, let his wing break." After the kola nut had been eaten, Okonkwo brought his palm wine from the corner of the hut where it had been placed, and stood it in the center of the group. He addressed Noirquebie, calling him "Our Father." "Nna-ai," he said. "I have brought you this little kola. As our people say, a man who pays respect to the great paves the way for his own greatness. I have come to pay you my respects, and also to ask a favor. But let us drink the wine first." Everybody thanked Okonkwo, and the neighbors brought out their drinking horns from the goatskin bags they carried. Noirquebie brought down his own horn, which was fastened to the rafters. The younger of his sons, who was also the youngest man in the group, moved to the center, raised the pot on his left knee, and began to pour out the wine. The first cup went to Okonkwo, who must taste his wine before anyone else. Then the group drank, beginning with the eldest man. When everyone had drunk 2 or 3 horns, Noirquebie sent for his wives. Some of them were not at home, and only 4 came in. "Is Anasi not in?" he asked them. They said she was coming. Anasi was the first wife, and the others could not drink before her, and so they stood, waiting. Anasi was a middle-aged woman, tall and strongly built. There was authority in her bearing, and she looked every inch the ruler of the womenfolk in a large and prosperous family. She wore the anklet of her husband's titles, which the first wife alone could wear. She walked up to her husband and accepted the horn from him. She then went down on one knee, drank a little, and handed back the horn. She rose, called him by his name, and went back to her hut. The other wives drank in the same way, in their proper order, and went away. The men then continued their drinking and talking. Ogbuefe Idigo was talking about the palm wine tapper, Obiako, who suddenly gave up his trade. "There must be something behind it," he said, wiping the foam of wine from his mustache with the back of his left hand. "There must be a reason for it. A toad does not run in the daytime for nothing." "Some people say the oracle warned him that he would fall off a palm tree and kill himself," said Akukalya. "Obiako has always been a strange one," said Noirquebie. "I've heard that many years ago, when his father had not been dead very long, he had gone to consult the oracle. The oracle said to him, 'Your dead father wants you to sacrifice a goat to him.' Do you know what he told the oracle? He said, 'Ask my dead father if he ever had a fowl when he was alive.' Everybody laughed heartily, except Okonkwo, who laughed uneasily, because, as the saying goes, an old woman is always uneasy when dry bones are mentioned in a proverb. Okonkwo remembered his own father. At last the young man who was pouring out the wine held up half a horn of the thick white dregs and said, 'What we are eating is finished.' 'We have seen it,' the others replied. 'Who will drink the dregs?' he asked. 'Whoever has a job in hand,' said Idigo, looking at Noirquebie's elder son, Iguelo, with a malicious twinkle in his eye. Everybody agreed that Iguelo should drink the dregs. He accepted the half-full horn from his brother and drank it. As Idigo had said, Iguelo had a job in hand because he had married his first wife a month or 2 before. The thick dregs of palm wine were supposed to be good for men who were going into their wives. After the wine had been drunk, Okonkwo laid his difficulties before Noirquebie. 'I have come to you for help,' he said. 'Perhaps you can already guess what it is. I have cleared a farm, but have no yams to sow. I know what it is to ask a man to trust another with his yams, especially these days when young men are afraid of hard work. I am not afraid of work. The lizard that jumped from the high Iroko tree to the ground said he would praise himself if no one else did. I began to fend for myself at an age when most people still suck at their mother's breasts. If you give me some yam seeds, I shall not fail you. Nwakibie cleared his throat. It pleases me to see a young man like you these days, when our youth has gone so soft. Many young men have come to me to ask for yams, but I have refused, because I knew they would just dump them in the earth and leave them to be choked by weeds. When I say no to them, they think I am hard-hearted, but it is not so. Eneke, the bird, says that since men have learned to shoot without missing, he has learned to fly without perching. I have learned to be stingy with my yams, but I can trust you. I know it as I look at you. As our father said, you can tell a ripe corn by its look. I shall give you twice 400 yams. Go ahead and prepare your farm. Okonkwo thanked him again and again and went home feeling happy. He knew that Nwakibie would not refuse him, but he had not expected he would be so generous. He had not hoped to get more than 400 seeds, but would now have to make a bigger farm. He hoped to get another 400 yams from one of his father's friends at Isuzo. Sharecropping was a very slow way of building up a barn of one's own. After all the toil, one only got a third of the harvest. But for a young man whose father had no yams, there was no other way. And what made it worse, in Okonkwo's case, was that he had to support his mother and 2 sisters from his meager harvest. And supporting his mother also meant supporting his father. She could not be expected to cook and eat while her husband starved. And so, at a very early age, when he was striving desperately to build a barn through sharecropping, Okonkwo was also fending for his father's house. It was like pouring grains of corn into a bag full of holes. His mother and sisters worked hard enough, but they grew women's crops, like cocoa yams, beans, and cassava. Yam, the king of crops, was a man's crop. The year that Okonkwo took 800 seed yams from Nwakibie was the worst year in living memory. Nothing happened at its proper time. It was either too early or too late. It seemed as if the world had gone mad. The first rains were late, and when they came, lasted only a brief moment. The blazing sun returned, more fierce than it had ever been known, and scorched all the green that had appeared with the rains. The earth burned like hot coals, and roasted all the yams that had been sown. Like all good farmers, Okonkwo had begun to sow with the first rains. He had sown 400 seeds when the rains dried up and the heat returned. He watched the sky all day for signs of rain clouds and lay awake all night. In the morning, he went back to his farm and saw the withering tendrils. He had tried to protect them from the smoldering earth by making rings of thick sisal leaves around them. But by the end of the day, the sisal rings were burned dry and gray. He changed them every day and prayed that the rain might fall in the night. But the drought continued for 8 market weeks, and the yams were killed. Some farmers had not planted their yams yet. They were the lazy, easy-going ones who always put off clearing their farms as long as they could. This year, they were the wise ones. They sympathized with their neighbors with much shaking of the head, but inwardly, they were happy for what they took to be their own foresight. Okonkwo planted what was left of his seed yams when the rains finally returned. He had one consolation. The yams he had sown before the drought were his own, the harvest of the previous year. He still had the 800 from Nwakibie and the 400 from his father's friend, so he would make a fresh start. But the year had gone mad. Rain fell as it had never fallen before. For days and nights together, it poured down in violent torrents and washed away the yam heaps. Trees were uprooted, and deep gorges appeared everywhere. Then the rain became less violent, but it went from day to day without a pause. The spell of sunshine, which always came in the middle of the wet season, did not appear. The yams put on luxuriant green leaves, but every farmer knew that without sunshine, the tubers would not grow. That year, the harvest was sad, like a funeral. and many farmers wept as they dug up the miserable and rotting yams. One man tied his cloth to a tree branch and hanged himself. Okonkwo remembered that tragic year with a cold shiver throughout the rest of his life. It always surprised him when he thought of it later that he did not sink under the load of despair. He knew that he was a fierce fighter, but that year had been enough to break the heart of a lion. "Since I survived that year," he always said, "I shall survive anything." He put it down to his inflexible will. His father, Unoka, who was then an ailing man, had said to him during that terrible harvest month, "Do not despair. I know you will not despair. You have a manly and a proud heart. A proud heart can survive a general failure, because such a failure does not prick its pride. It is more difficult and more bitter when a man fails alone." Unoka was like that in his last days. His love of talk had grown with age and sickness. It tried Okonkwo's patience beyond words. Chapter 4. "Looking at a king's mouth," said an old man, "one would think he never sucked at his mother's breast." He was talking about Okonkwo, who had risen so suddenly from great poverty and misfortune to be one of the lords of the clan. The old man bore no ill will towards Okonkwo. Indeed, he respected him for his industry and success. But he was struck, as most people were, by Okonkwo's brusqueness in dealing with less successful men. Only a week ago, a man had contradicted him at a kindred meeting, which they held to discuss the next ancestral feast. Without looking at the man, Okonkwo had said, "This meeting is for men." The man who had contradicted him had no titles. That was why he had called him a woman. Okonkwo knew how to kill a man's spirit. Everybody at the kindred meeting took sides with Osugo when Okonkwo called him a woman. The oldest man present said sternly that those whose palm kernels were cracked for them by a benevolent spirit should not forget to be humble. Okonkwo said he was sorry for what he had said, and the meeting continued. But it was really not true that Okonkwo's palm kernels had been cracked for him by a benevolent spirit. He had cracked them himself. Anyone who knew his grim struggle against poverty and misfortune could not say he had been lucky. If ever a man deserved his success, that man was Okonkwo. At an early age, he had achieved fame as the greatest wrestler in all the land. That was not luck. At the most, one could say that his chi, or personal god, was good. But the Igbo people have a proverb that when a man says yes, his chi says yes also. Okonkwo said yes very strongly, so his chi agreed. And not only his chi, but his clan too, because it judged a man by the work of his hands. That was why Okonkwo had been chosen by the 9 villages to carry a message of war to their enemies, unless they agreed to give up a young man and a virgin to atone for the murder of Udo's wife. And such was the deep fear that their enemies had for Umofia, that they treated Okonkwo like a king, and brought him a virgin who was given to Udo as wife, and a lad, Ikemefuna. The elders of the clan had decided that Ikemefuna should be in Okonkwo's care for a while. But no one thought it would be as long as 3 years. They seemed to forget all about him as soon as they had taken the decision. At first, Ikemefuna was very much afraid. Once or twice he had tried to run away, but he did not know where to begin. He thought of his mother and his 3-year-old sister, and wept bitterly. Nwoye's mother was very kind to him, and treated him as one of her own children. But all he said was, "When shall I go home?" When Okonkwo heard that he would not eat any food, he came into the hut with a big stick in his hand, and stood over him while he swallowed his yams, trembling. A few moments later, he went behind the hut and began to vomit painfully. Nwoye's mother went to him and placed her hands on his chest and on his back. He was ill for 3 market weeks. When he recovered, he seemed to have overcome his great fear and sadness. He was by nature a very lively boy, and he gradually became popular in Okonkwo's household, especially with the children. Okonkwo's son, Nwoye, who was 2 years younger, became quite inseparable from him, because he seemed to know everything. He could fashion out flutes from bamboo stems, and even from the elephant grass. He knew the names of all the birds and could set clever traps for the little bush rodents. And he knew which trees made the strongest bows. Even Okonkwo himself became very fond of the boy, inwardly, of course. Okonkwo never showed any emotion openly, unless it be the emotion of anger. To show affection was a sign of weakness. The only thing worth demonstrating was strength. He therefore treated Ikemefuna as he treated everybody else, with a heavy hand. But there was no doubt that he liked the boy. Sometimes, when he went to big village meetings or communal ancestral feasts, he allowed Ikemefuna to accompany him, like a son, carrying his stool and his goatskin bag, and indeed, Ikemefuna called him father. Ikemefuna came to Umuofia at the end of the carefree season between harvest and planting. In fact, he recovered from his illness only a few days before the week of peace began. And that was also the year Okonkwo broke the peace and was punished, as was the custom, by Ezeani, the priest of the earth goddess. Okonkwo was provoked to justifiable anger by his youngest wife, who went to plait her hair at her friend's house and did not return early enough to cook the afternoon meal. Okonkwo did not know at first that she was not at home. After waiting in vain for her dish, he went to her hut to see what she was doing. There was nobody in the hut, and the fireplace was cold. "Where is Ojiugo?" he asked his second wife, who came out of her hut to draw water from a gigantic pot in the shade of a small tree in the middle of the compound. "She has gone to plait her hair." Okonkwo bit his lips as anger welled up within him. "Where are her children? Did she take them?" he asked with unusual coolness and restraint. "They are here," answered his first wife, Nuoye's mother. Okonkwo bent down and looked into her hut. Ojiugo's children were eating with the children of his first wife. "Did she ask you to feed them before she went?" "Yes," lied Nuoye's mother, trying to minimize Ojiugo's thoughtlessness. Okonkwo knew she was not speaking the truth. He walked back to his obi to await Ojiugo's return, and when she returned, he beat her very heavily. In his anger, he had forgotten that it was the week of peace. His first two wives ran out in great alarm, pleading with him that it was the sacred week, but Okonkwo was not the man to stop beating somebody halfway through, not even for fear of a goddess. Okonkwo's neighbors heard his wife crying and sent their voices over the compound walls to ask what was the matter. Some of them came over to see for themselves. It was unheard of to beat somebody during the sacred week. Before it was dusk, Ezeani, who was the priest of the earth goddess, Ani, called on Okonkwo in his obi. Okonkwo brought out kola nut and placed it before the priest. "Take away your kola nut. I shall not eat in the house of a man who has no respect for our gods and ancestors." Okonkwo tried to explain to him what his wife had done, but Ezeani seemed to pay no attention. He held a short staff in his hand, which he brought down on the floor to emphasize his points. "Listen to me," he said when Okonkwo had spoken. "You are not a stranger in Umuofia. You know as well as I do that our forefathers ordained that before we plant any crops in the earth, we should observe a week in which a man does not say a harsh word to his neighbor. We live in peace with our fellows to honor our great goddess of the earth, without whose blessing our crops will not grow. You have committed a great evil." He brought down his staff heavily on the floor. "Your wife was at fault. But even if you came into your obi and found her lover on top of her, you would still have committed a great evil to beat her." His staff came down again. "The evil you have done can ruin the whole clan. The earth goddess, whom you have insulted, may refuse to give us her increase, and we shall all perish." His tone now changed from anger to command. "You will bring to the shrine of Ani tomorrow 1 she-goat, 1 hen, a length of cloth, and 100 cowries." He rose and left the hut. Okonkwo did as the priest said. He also took with him a pot of palm wine. Inwardly, he was repentant, but he was not the man to go about telling his neighbors that he was in error. and so people said he had no respect for the gods of the clan. His enemies said his good fortune had gone to his head. They called him the little bird, Nza, who so far forgot himself after a heavy meal that he challenged his chi. No work was done during the week of peace. People called on their neighbors and drank palm wine. This year they talked of nothing else but the Inso Ani which Okonkwo had committed. It was the first time for many years that a man had broken the sacred peace. Even the oldest men could only remember one or two other occasions somewhere in the dim past. Ogwefi Ezeudu, who was the oldest man in the village, was telling two other men who came to visit him that the punishment for breaking the peace of Ani had become very mild in their clan. "It has not always been so," he said. "My father told me that he had been told that in the past, a man who broke the peace was dragged on the ground through the village until he died. But after a while, this custom was stopped, because it spoiled the peace, which it was meant to preserve." "Somebody told me yesterday," said one of the younger men, "that in some clans, it is an abomination for a man to die during the week of peace." "It is indeed true," said Ogwefe Ezeudu. "They have that custom in Obodoani. If a man dies at this time, he is not buried, but cast into the evil forest. It is a bad custom which these people observe because they lack understanding. They throw away large numbers of men and women without burial. And what is the result? Their clan is full of the evil spirits of these unburied dead, hungry to do harm to the living." After the week of peace, every man and his family began to clear the bush to make new farms. The cut bush was left to dry, and fire was then set to it. As the smoke rose into the sky, kites appeared from different directions and hovered over the burning field in silent valediction. The rainy season was approaching when they would go away until the dry season returned. Okonkwo spent the next few days preparing his seed yams. He looked at each yam carefully to see whether it was good for sowing. Sometimes he decided that a yam was too big to be sown as one seed, and he split it deftly along its length with his sharp knife. His eldest son, Nwoye, and Ikemefuna helped him by fetching the yams in long baskets from the barn and in counting the prepared seeds in groups of 400. Sometimes, Okonkwo gave them a few yams each to prepare, but he always found fault with their effort, and he said so with much threatening. "Do you think you are cutting up yams for cooking?" he asked Nwoye. "If you split another yam of this size, I shall break your jaw. You think you are still a child. I began to own a farm at your age. And you," he said to Ikemefuna, "do you not grow yams where you come from?" Inwardly, Okonkwo knew that the boys were still too young to understand fully the difficult art of preparing seed yams, but he thought that one could not begin too early. Yam stood for manliness, and he who could feed his family on yams from one harvest to another was a very great man indeed. Okonkwo wanted his son to be a great farmer and a great man. He would stamp out the disquieting signs of laziness, which he thought he already saw in him. "I will not have a son who cannot hold up his head in the gathering of the clan. I would sooner strangle him with my own hands. And if you stand staring at me like that," he swore, "a Madiora will break your head for you." Some days later, when the land had been moistened by 2 or 3 heavy rains, Okonkwo and his family went to the farm with baskets of seed yams, their hoes and machetes, and the planting began. They made single mounds of earth in straight lines all over the field, and sowed the yams in them. Yam, the king of crops, was a very exacting king. For 3 or 4 moons it demanded hard work and constant attention from cockcrow till the chickens went back to roost. The young tendrils were protected from the earth heat with rings of sisal leaves. As the rains became heavier, the women planted maize, melons, and beans between the yam mounds. The yams were then staked, first with little sticks, and later with tall and big tree branches. The women weeded the farm 3 times at definite periods in the life of the yams, neither early nor late. And now, the rains had really come, so heavy and persistent that even the village rainmaker no longer claimed to be able to intervene. He could not stop the rain now, just as he would not attempt to start it in the heart of the dry season, without serious danger to his own health. The personal dynamism required to counter the forces of these extremes of weather would be far too great for the human frame. And so nature was not interfered with in the middle of the rainy season. Sometimes it poured down in such thick sheets of water that earth and sky seemed merged in one gray wetness. It was then uncertain whether the low rumbling of Amadiora's thunder came from above or below. At such times, in each of the countless thatched huts of Umwofia, children sat around their mother's cooking fire telling stories, or with their father in his obi, warming themselves from a log fire, roasting and eating maize. It was a brief resting period between the exacting and arduous planting season and the equally exacting but light-hearted month of harvests. Ikemefuna had begun to feel like a member of Okonkwo's family. He still thought about his mother and his 3-year-old sister, and he had moments of sadness and depression. But he and Nwoye had become so deeply attached to each other that such moments became less frequent and less poignant. Ikemefuna had an endless stock of folk tales. Even those which Nwoye knew already were told with a new freshness and the local flavor of a different clan. Nwoye remembered this period very vividly till the end of his life. He even remembered how he had laughed when Ikemefuna told him that the proper name for a corn cob with only a few scattered grains was Eze Agadi Nwayi, or the teeth of an old woman. Nwoye's mind had gone immediately to Nwayeke, who lived near the Udala tree. She had about 3 teeth and was always smoking her pipe. Gradually, the rains became lighter and less frequent, and earth and sky once again became separate. The rain fell in thin, slanting showers through sunshine and quiet breeze. Children no longer stayed indoors, but ran about singing, "The rain is falling, the sun is shining. Alone, Nnadi is cooking and eating." Nwoye always wondered who Nnadi was and why he should live all by himself, cooking and eating. In the end, he decided that Nnadi must live in that land of Ikemefuna's favorite story, where the ant holds his court in splendor, and the sands transfer. Chapter 5.